It's Wednesday, December 16th, 2015, and this is Real in the Field Gulls, the weekly Seahawks podcast coming to you normally on Thursdays. Maybe you're listening to this on Thursday, but it is Wednesday as we record it to preview the Seahawks against the Cleveland Browns, hosting Johnny and the boys this Sunday at CenturyLink Field. The Seahawks 8-5, an outside chance to clinch the playoff spot with a couple of other teams losing this week if they can do it and win. We've got Dan Kadar, also known as Mocking the Draft, but who happens to be a lifelong Browns fan, coming on in a little bit to talk about the Cleveland Browns, help us preview, like I said, Johnny and the boys, which is what I'm calling them. With me, as always, Danny Kelly of fieldgulls.com. Danny and the boys, how you doing?
Doing well. I like the Johnny and the boys thing. That's catchy.
Johnny and the boys. It's something that I've just come up with, and it is genius. So these next two games really have been on the schedule for a long time. Hopefully, we've been seeing them as W's at home against teams like the Browns and the Rams, even though the Rams did beat the Seahawks early in the season. But focusing on the Browns. Speaking of Browns, someone with the last name Brown, and you could say he's one of the Browns out there that are in the world, is Bryce Brown. He's been, re-signed. So has Kristen Michael, news today. So with the opening after Thomas Rawls' injury with Marshawn Lynch on the mend, Danny, what are you expecting this weekend in terms of running back carries?
Yeah, I think that my guess is Bryce Brown's going to be the guy that, quote, starts the game. And then he and Kristen Michael will probably share carries and then see whoever kind of ride the hot hand or whatever. And then have Fred Jackson on third down. So that's kind of how I envision it going. And I think Kristen Michael will have the chance to, I guess, win the job or whatever and prove that he can do it, I guess. But I think Bryce Brown will be good too. So it's gonna be really interesting to see how it goes. I think I'm happy with kind of what they've done. I did not have a good feeling about DeJuan Harris doing it in terms of carrying the load for the Seahawks while we wait for Marshawn Lynch to get back, if he's going to come back at all. So I think this is probably about as good of an option as you can have list late in the year. So I went back and watched some of Bryce Brown's carries from over the last couple of years, and I like how he runs. Honestly, I think he's got some burst, he's got some power. He leaps over guys at times. He's physical. I think he'll have to avoid running out of bounds. There's a couple of times where he ran out of bounds rather than initiating contact. I don't think the Seahawks like that, so that might have to change. But
yeah, for some reason I thought that I had remembered Bryce Brown as like a college star that for some reason had slipped out of the draft, but he barely even played in college, from what I can tell. He was maybe what I thought he was he was a top recruit.
Right. He was the number one running back recruit in the country at one point. Big time 5-star blue chip. And then he, for a number of reasons, I don't remember off the top of my head, I think he transferred once and then didn't work out at K-State and ended up not finishing school and then just entered the draft after, I think, being, hanging out at home for a year or something like that. And so, he's still only 24. He doesn't have very much wear on the tread, and he's obviously a really, really good athlete. His brother is Arthur Brown, linebacker for the Ravens. So I don't know. I don't know exactly why he didn't work out anywhere. He was with Philly and then he was with Buffalo and then he went down, just to free agency after he got dropped by both of those teams. And he had a couple of issues with fumbles early in his career, but he hasn't really done that the last couple of years. So we'll see how it goes. He might have worked on that a lot and figured that out, hopefully.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only turnovers the Seahawks have had in any of the last 4 weeks are a fumble by Thomas Rawls against Minnesota and a fumble against DeJuan Harris against Baltimore. And now they're starting Bryce Brown and Kristen Michael, two guys that may or may not fumble. So it'd be some sort of interesting to see what happens against the Browns. This journey with Kristen Michael has been quite interesting. You never would have assumed before the year he's traded, and now here we are in week 15, and who knows if he can get the bulk of the carries or not, but he's going to get a chance, it seems. What do you think? I mean, we've talked about it to death over the last 2.5 years, probably, but I'm still sort of dumbfounded at the whole prospect of what do you think people don't like about Kristen Michael?
I mean, it's you want. I'm trying to be careful here because it's all conjecture and kind of like reading the tea leaves on what's happening, but it just kind of feels like he's really immature, and teams just don't like that. He's not maybe buying in enough or knowing the system enough, or obviously the whole thing that he only carries the ball with one hand doesn't help. He's obviously a really, really gifted physical athlete, and when he gets him open space, he looks really amazing. But his yards per carry over his career isn't all that special. There might be a question of whether he has very good vision in terms of picking the right lanes or being too aggressive or not, not patient enough, or maybe he's just, I don't know. It could be a number of things. It could be off the field stuff. It could be how he picks lanes on the field. I think it's probably a little bit of everything. It sounds like when he went to Dallas, he got in the doghouse for not wearing a suit to the game, like on the way to the game, which is one of the rumors. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's what we heard. And that could have been one of those things where he knew he was supposed to wear a suit and he didn't do it. So that kind of points to, I guess, his maturity or whatever. It's kind of like a Ryan Mallett thing. So bottom line is, he's still really physically gifted, obviously. You're hard pressed to find the 230-pound guy as athletic as he is. So that's cool, and that's why there's been so much excitement about him over the years. But I'm trying not to get my hopes up anything's going to go, this time around, just because kind of just, I told someone the other day, like, that train has really sailed. Like, I really didn't think they were going to bring him back. So it kind of feels like at this point they didn't have very many options. So
I think you said on this very podcast that we didn't think that they would bring him back, and nobody would have disagreed. I don't think, I think the only reason that I would even bring it up, or if I did bring it up, was because of his familiarity with the systems, because he was available, because he was just here. So it really wasn't that much different than Bryce Brown in the sense that at least he was a guy that, he wouldn't have to introduce himself to the team again. There's a guy that had been around and at one point had a lot of talent. You would think, it's interesting to me that I even realized he didn't play that much at Texas A&M, especially in his last season.
It was the same shit that happened here, pretty much.
Yeah,
in the doghouse and never got out.
It would just be kind of weird. I mean, there are situations we've seen around the NFL where guys, do mature and sort of get a second chance and make the most of it. If you could look at a Pac-Man Jones or a BMW. There are guys that figure it out maybe a little bit, very late in life, 24, 25, 26. So, which is very late in life. And, we'll see what happens with Kristen Michael. You could argue that the Seahawks playing the Browns and Rams over the next 2 weeks, potentially, not having when they go to Arizona, it might not make a difference, win or lose. We'll see what happens by then, what the situation is. And then the divisional round or the wild card round, if it's against a losing team, you could argue that the Seahawks are going to be fine with or without a running back all the way up till, the divisional round if they make it that far. So over the next 4 weeks, they'll be okay. But at that point, we're asking the question, will Marshawn Lynch be ready by then? So as far as Lynch goes, here's a guy that's been out a few weeks. The timetable is coming to that edge where they said he would be back, and they aren't giving any updates. Maybe because they don't have them.
Or maybe they don't.
What do you think what does that tell you about the Marshawn Lynch situation?
It's kind of weird, isn't it? I think. I guess it's not weird in the sense that you kind of expect this from Lynch. He's kind of always done his own thing. He's always done OTAs off. Or not OTAs, but off season stuff off by himself. So maybe it's not that weird, but he's off somewhere rehabbing apparently, and it sounds like either the team doesn't want to say or they don't know, or maybe they're just being coy, or who knows what's going on. But I would guess, and I said this actually way earlier, I don't think he'd be back until the playoffs. So it's not really surprising to me that they're, that he's not close to being back yet. I don't think there's any reason at this point to rush it. The Seahawks have been playing really, really well without him. It'd be a good chance to see what they can do with Bryce Brown and Kristen Michael this weekend. And overall, I just don't think there's a real strong reason to rush Lynch back if he's not going to be ready. So it's not surprising to me whatsoever that he's not around. This was more of a 6-week injury back when people talked about it first. And I think the Seahawks said it'd be like 3 or 4, which was probably pushing it a bit, in my opinion. So,
you don't want to maybe take any chances. If they have to win in Arizona, maybe he's back by then. I know he won't be back before then. And then, it happens to be a thing if you don't want to take any chances. And I don't think anybody ever wants to take any chances in a playoff game. Perhaps he comes back then. But,
yeah,
it seems to be one of the things that I sort of struggle with is that I feel like a lot of people might see the Marshawn Lynch. Maybe they don't think that he cares anymore or that he hasn't for a long time. And I'm not sure that I necessarily totally buy into that, because it does seem like Marshawn Lynch does have a pretty strong love affair with the game of football, and we heard earlier in the year Cam Chancellor talking specifically about him and Marshawn Lynch having a plan, and Cam Chancellor giving up on his holdout and referencing that plan, though it may have just been about money and he wanted to use some sort of other excuse. Do you sort of feel like, where do you feel like Marshawn Lynch is at right now? Because if he does want to play another year and he feels like if he's taking any advice from his agent, he might say, hey, you're going to get released either way, but let's go out on a high note so you can get a better contract somewhere else next year.
Yeah, I mean, trying to guess what he's thinking is like, impossible pretty much, because he doesn't really talk to the media very much, and they don't know. He has a really tight circle, so people don't really tend to know what he's thinking. And I think that's kind of goes to the whole thing. Like right now, he's gone, and the Seahawks don't really know what is going on with him. So, I don't know what he's going to do next year. I've been saying I think he's going to retire after this year regardless. So, just based on some of the stuff he said early in the off season, basically he said, well, you start to think you can do it for another year when they throw 14 million at you or whatever it was he said on Conan. And it's like, man, it's like, really, that's like what it came down to.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think he's probably done after this year anyway. So my guess would be he'll be back this year to kind of do one final hurrah. Hopefully, propel the Seahawks to the Super Bowl again and kind of do that. So that would be my guess. I think he'll be back once the playoffs start, and I think next year is sort of irrelevant because I think he's going to retire.
Yeah, we'll see. It'd be nice, if the Seahawks. It seems like they're in a position to make at least another playoff run. How far they make it is yet to be determined. But if you're a player out there and you have an opportunity to play for the Seahawks this season, as Marshawn Lynch does, you would think if this is it, then might as well, give everything you have for the end there. As far as other injuries go, what is the latest on Jordan Hill and Cam Chancellor?
I don't know, actually. I missed the presser today. Let's see here. It says
okay, so they did. I mean, I know that they said that, Cam Chancellor, they're not necessarily ruling him in or out, that Kelsey McRae, I think that they are prepared for Kelsey McRae to start if necessary, which is, again, it's such an interesting the amount of things that the Pete Carroll got wrong apparently in week 1 with the fact that, some of these guys in the first couple of weeks, the way that they're putting in Kerry Williams or say Deion Bailey in week 1, there's so many other guys that, Deshaun Shedd being at safety instead of corner. I mean, these are things that you figure out, I guess, once the games start and you can actually see them play against first string competition. But, now
Right.
we've transitioned all the way into, Kelsey McRae being the backup strong safety and potentially, starting another game this week. Does that give you any pause against Johnny Manziel and, Travis Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I think I don't think the Seahawks are so good that, they can just like dominate the Browns no matter what. I think eventually I'm guessing Cam will play. I think Hill's probably not going to play again, and that's fine because they got Frank Clark in there to kind of take over for him. I don't really want to see what the Seahawks look like with Kelsey McRae in there, although I guess maybe it would be a good experience for him. But overall, like, with the way that Manziel played last week, he kind of has a lot of confidence. He's coming in here with a lot of confidence, and they pretty much dominated the 49ers last week. So, I mean, it makes you worry a little bit. But again,
Yeah,
I think same with the Ravens, though. Like, the Seahawks are a much better team. So,
there are some similarities, I feel like, between Johnny Manziel and Christine Michael. Not just that they both played at Texas A&M, but Christine Michael didn't ever get a lot of an opportunity in Seattle, but he did average like 4.9 yards per carry. And Johnny Manziel's only been out there a few starts, but he's had a couple of good starts under his belt. If you got, if you have a 23-year-old quarterback that goes out there like he did 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh and goes 33 of 45 for 372 yards, you would probably say we got something here. But it seems like there's a maturity level or an immaturity thing going on, perhaps with both Johnny Manziel and Kristen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing is, they don't trust him or whatever, and I don't blame him because he's made a couple of really poor choices and all that, and there's always been the talent level there, but it's always been the question of whether he can keep it together and be a pro or whatever. So that's just why I worry a little bit, because he had such a good game last week, and then that could lead to him gaining confidence and kind of it's now or never for him a little bit, I think, because just the way that things have gone in Cleveland for him, it wouldn't surprise if they traded him after this year, and who knows where you end up then. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, speaking of Jordan Hill and the Cleveland Browns, and as far as Jordan Hill's backup, one of those guys, or not, maybe now he's a starter and used to play on the Cleveland Browns. See, hold on, wait for the segue. Atiba Rubin's been getting some good praise lately from Pete Carroll. Have you seen a lot of Atiba Rubin out there?
Yeah, I haven't watched him like specifically, but the Seahawks run defense has been really strong this year, and that starts a lot with the three technique in their system. And it was interesting because Pete Carroll said that this week that he's the best three technique that they've had in his time with the Seahawks, which is pretty crazy. So that was definitely encouraging. Obviously, Pete Carroll can, he tends to be a bully and praises his players, but that was pretty cool to hear him say that. Obviously, that means he's playing really well. And he was saying they play an over front against a lot of teams, which means the three technique is on the strong side of the field, and a lot of the runs go right at him, off guard, off tackle, and so and off center, and so he's taking a lot of double teams. So his job is basically to hold up, be stout, let the linebackers flow in behind him and through the gaps. And so, it's one of those things that not a lot of people, necessarily watch or give credit for being important, but it's big in the Seahawks team because then they want to make teams one-dimensional. So, it's really cool to see that, and it kind of lives up to like what we'd heard. Obviously, we talked to Phil Savage, former Browns, or was he with the Browns? He was the Browns GM at one point.
He was the Browns GM.
Yeah, so we talked to him. He was excited about Rubin and thought he would do good things for the Seahawks, and that's proven to be correct. I remember hearing Mike Holmgren say the same thing. He was with the Browns too at one point. So I think maybe he was just kind of miscast a little bit in Cleveland in a 3-4. So it's been good. It's another one of those underrated things that Seahawks did in the offseason that no one really talks about.
Yeah. You get a little echo here, Danny.
How am I sounding now?
Yo, you sound good. I'm getting an echo, so it seems like it's coming through maybe on my end. Now it's gone, but this is the part of the podcast where we talk about echoes, and it's called segment. But let me ask you this question. We got Dan Kadar coming in here in a second. Do you remember when Dwayne Bowe was good?
I mean, like very vaguely. It was a while ago, wasn't it?
It's pretty insane how much Dwayne Bowe has fallen off because, I'm pretty sure he's been healthy all year. He's mostly, it looks like, inactive. He's got 3 catches for 31 yards. They all came in one game.
Yeah.
Back in 2010 with the Chiefs, he had 72 catches and 15 touchdown catches. He led the NFL in touchdowns.
I think
In the
he had 3 touchdowns against the Seahawks one year.
Yeah, probably. In the 5 seasons since then, he has 13 touchdown catches. And it's pretty interesting. Obviously, last year he had 0 touchdown catches with the Chiefs, but he did have 60 catches for 754 yards. But
Really?
there was something there. He's only 31 years old. It seems as though perhaps, Dwayne Bowe, maybe he's just been struck with the Cleveland curse, as it were. We're going to ask Dan Kadar all about that and more. Dan just joining us now on the show. Dan, how are you?
Good, guys. How are you?
We're doing excellent.
We're doing good. You obviously came in just in time for Dwayne Bowe talk.
Oh, God.
Bowe Talks. That could be the name of a podcast or something like that. Bowe Talks.
Will the podcast get more listens than Dwayne Bowe gets snaps this season?
Much likely, or very likely. It's interesting, Dan, now that you're on the show, welcome. And, the situation for the Cleveland Browns at wide receiver, it is getting more and more interesting as the year goes on. First, a long time ago, Josh Gordon, the number 1, gets suspended. 3 weeks ago, Andrew Hawkins and Taylor Gabriel get concussions, and they've missed the last 3 games. And just recently, Brian Hartline is placed on injured reserve. Just exactly who is going to be the number 2 receiver this week next to Travis Benjamin, and is Dwayne Bowe finally going to play?
Well, here is the best way I can define the Browns wide receiver situation. Dwayne Bowe has been a healthy scratch several times this year. I think he's gotten in 2, maybe 3 games. They signed some guy named Darius Jennings a few weeks ago. He's played in the last 2 games. They cut him today. So that is the Browns wide receiver situation in a nutshell. I mean, they have Marlon Moore, who is a special teams demon and not a return demon. He makes tackles on special teams.
Okay.
He might be their number 2 wide receiver. Terrell Pryor is in the house, but he did not. I don't think he got a pass thrown to him on Sunday. So it's Travis Benjamin, and they use the tight ends a lot. So it's very, very slim right now for the Browns.
Do you think that? I mean, obviously the big story in Browns land is the Johnny Manziel thing. First of all, how did you think he played last week?
I thought he played really well, and he did a lot of moving around in the pocket and manipulating the defense with how he moves, and he did a very good job on probably 3 or 4 plays of directing his wide receiver to a new spot on the route and completing the pass, and all that stuff was encouraging. What was discouraging was that it came against the terrible 49ers. So
Yeah.
you can take a little bit away from how well he played and a couple of the things he did earlier this year, but you really have to recognize who it comes against. And the 49ers just look like a team that's given up on the season, basically. And Mike Pettin, the Browns head coach, kind of intimated as much today. So
Interesting.
This week is the test, basically, and we're going to find out a whole heck of a lot about Johnny Manziel on Sunday.
Well, it's do you want to follow up on that, Danny?
I was just going to ask, generally, like, are people feeling good about it, I guess?
It's really bizarre, the reaction of Cleveland Browns fandom, and I say this from my desk at a newspaper where I put our stuff up on our Facebook page about the Browns, and anytime Johnny Manziel does something not great, it is, he's the worst, he's got to go, cut him. And this week it's all, see, I told you all, he's a winner, and he needs to be the guy in there. So, the fans just keep going back and forth just about as much as the Browns organization does. So, if he continues playing like this, it's going to make things incredibly interesting for the Browns. If he really struggles over these last 3 games, it's going to make the decision much easier in the offseason.
I'm just kind of curious as well because it is an interesting. I mean, this is how Cleveland Browns keep getting tangled up in these situations, right? Because you've
Hmm.
got a quarterback that may or may not have the talent to start long term in the NFL. You spent a first round pick on him, and frankly, most guys under 25 that have a couple of good games without getting, the actual opportunity to just go out there and start without fearing that their chain's going to be yanked at any moment. I mean, on one hand, Johnny Manziel, I don't know if he's been given. I'm not saying that it's weird to say fair shot for a guy that may not want a fair shot if he keeps on messing around, but at the same time, the guy in control could be coaching his last 3 games. So, how exactly, which side do you side with? Do you side with Pettine and say, let's keep this guy and get rid of Manziel, or do you side with Manziel and say, well, let's get in a coach that might have a little bit more sense and can do better than what the Browns have done this year, and see what else we can do next year, maybe with a guy that knows what to do with Johnny Manziel and the rest of these guys.
Well, it really is a fascinating dichotomy of the two because everyone seems to think Pettine's gone at the end of the year, but who's to say anything? Obviously, anything can happen in the NFL, as the stupid cliche line goes. And if Johnny Manziel somehow wins the Browns their last 3 games, I don't think it's going to happen. But if it does, and he saves Mike Pettine's job, that's interesting because I think it's been pretty obvious that Mike Pettine, on a personal level, does not care for Johnny Manziel, and just based on how he's treated him, benching him,
Right.
but not suspending him, and just the way he speaks about him. So it'll be interesting if Mike Pettine's job is saved by a guy he does not like. But to kind of answer your question a little more succinctly, you know, Johnny Manziel unfortunately gave up the benefit of the doubt based on his actions off the field. So, you know, you're always constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop. Our guy that covers the Browns, that's his beat. He's always on busted coverage, waiting to see when Johnny Manziel's going to show up. Unfortunately, but that's the reality of it. And you just keep waiting for something else to pop up with the guy, and that's unfortunate but true. And I tend to think that Mike Pettine is a pretty good coach. His defense is a mess. I think his offense is okay, but it just doesn't have the pieces. So I tend to side more with Mike Pettine and wanting to ride that out more than I would Johnny Manziel. It will be just fascinating though to see what this kid can do in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting when you talk about the offense. I mean, as much as terrible as the Browns have played, and as bad as it looks like things are going that they could get the #1 pick, at some point along the way, you found 1,000-yard tight end and 1,000-yard receiver. It looks like next year you could be adding back Josh Gordon, who is arguably a top 10 receiver, top 5. Then even so are the 3, 4, 5 guys like Hawkins and Gabriel. That there are pieces there to build around with Johnny Manziel, and all the talk about his attitude. I'm kind of curious because I'm just wondering, like, maybe it's a thing of how famous he was in college and how it followed him, and people are sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But there's a team in your division that, since the 70s has won, 6 championships, has sort of taken away all the good stuff that the Cleveland Browns had in their franchise before then. I wouldn't say that they've actually painted a picture of having these great human beings on their team. Why do we sort of ignore it with Ben Roethlisberger or some of these other guys? I mean, it can't just be the fact that Roethlisberger is great, because we haven't really even seen if Johnny Manziel is good or not for a full season.
Well, Ben Roethlisberger was also in the Super Bowl, I think, in his second year. So he had that going for him. So when Ben Roethlisberger goes to the Super Bowl right at the start of his career, I think it's easier for people to brush aside his transgressions off the field that came after that. And he's been pretty clean since then as well. And Johnny Manziel, it's just been the opposite. He has not really had that much success on the field, but he's had the stuff off the field. So you kind of garner that that shield basically of okay, well, I was in the Super Bowl, so I'm going to go screw something up. You can't really do anything about it. I mean, you're not going to cut me, so deal with it, I guess. And that's been the luxury Ben Roethlisberger has kind of had in his career, and it's also helped that he's been a very, very, very good football player the whole time. So um, it does not help that the Cleveland Browns passed on him when he played 2 hours from Cleveland Browns Stadium in college. So
Oh, no.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure everything else that might be going on with the Steelers, but as far as a Roethlisberger versus Manziel kind of discussion, winning helps cure all, despite how dumb you may be.
Last week, the Browns rushed for 230 yards. I'm guessing that was probably a season high or close to it.
It was.
First of all, what do you think of Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson as kind of like a thunder and lightning or 1-2 punch or whatever? And do you expect that to be a long-term running back situation?
I think that's the hope, but Crowell has just been so wildly inconsistent. I
Yeah.
mean, he looked great, but 2 of the runs were 50 yards or more. So, there are some outliers in that game for sure.
Hmm.
And then if you look at some of the previous weeks, he's having 7 rushes for 8 yards. So, he's just so wildly inconsistent. And this week he said, if they would have stuck with the running game more, they would have more wins. And I don't know. It's kind of like Eddie Lacy in Green Bay. You just can't rely on him to constantly feed him the ball and get positive results because it just hasn't been there. And the Browns have a pretty good offensive line, so I tend to think that's not the issue. I'm a little curious about some of the running plays that they do, but Isaiah Crowell, it seems like he's a confidence player, and once he busts through on a pretty solid one, he might have a good day. Duke Johnson, he's very exciting, and the Browns were relying on him a whole lot this year. He was banged up to start the season, and then they did this weird thing where they just wouldn't get him the ball. And like in one game, he had 2 touches in the second half of a game that was close, and some of that stuff. That's when it becomes hard to defend someone like Mike Pettin. And when he actually gets the ball in space, he's very dangerous, and we saw some of that last week. But he's also been a little inconsistent. He's been banged up, but he does look like a good player.
I mentioned Gary Barnidge earlier. He's got 65 catches for 901 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's 30 years old. He came into this season with almost nothing to his name as far as, just the fact that he stuck around in the NFL as long as he did is probably a testament to his blocking ability or special teams or whatnot. Is it a product of system, or when you watch Gary Barnidge every week, are you like, where was this guy the whole time? This guy's making amazing catches. He's fast, blah, blah, blah. What's making Gary Barnidge so effective?
There were flashes of it last year, and it was just a thing where the quarterbacks just weren't getting him the ball enough, or they weren't running him out on the right kind of plays enough. So, this year he came into the year as an impending free agent. So you do always wonder, okay, is this guy balling out because he's about to be a free agent? And you wonder the same thing about Travis Benjamin. Now, the good thing for the Browns is that they got Gary Barnidge recently on a 3-year deal for $12 million, and that's a really nice deal for the Browns. Believe it or not, the Browns did something well, and he's very much the fan favorite in this area because he's not a super athlete type of player. He's just a blue collar, hardworking, kind of slow, doesn't do anything spectacularly, but he's very productive, and he's an amazing guy in the community as well. So he's very much engrossed himself with the fan base. But you do always wonder in the back of your head, is this a 1-year sensation type of thing? So we'll see. But I don't know. He at the very yeah, go ahead.
Do you think you wonder that more because of you're a Browns fan? I mean, that the fact that you've had so many of these guys that put up one season of 1,000 yards?
Well, it's what I wonder with Travis Benjamin because he's a free agent at the end of the year too. So, he's been here for 4 years, I think, and this is really the first time he's made an impact. And maybe it's a symptom of the Browns just not having any other good wide receivers. But yeah, I don't know. It is a fan base steeped in self-loathing, so that could be part of it, sure.
Moving to the defensive side of the football, the Browns signed a couple of players that a lot of Seahawks had in mind, or Seahawks fans had in mind during free agencies of various seasons. The two guys I'm curious about are Randy Starks and Desmond Bryant. How have those guys played for the Browns?
Randy Starks hasn't been great. He's just okay, particularly against the run, is I guess his specialty, and the Browns are one of the worst run defenses in the league. So that should kind of paint a good enough picture of Randy Starks at this point in his career. The Browns do have a lot of bodies up there, though, so it's not like he's playing 80 or 90% of the snaps on defense every week. Desmond Bryant, when he plays well, he's incredible. When he does not play well, you can't even tell he's in the game. He can just be a complete non-factor at times. But when he is on, there are not many defensive linemen in the NFL that are built like that and have that kind of ability. And he can be a very good player when he wants to be. It's just another thing where he's so inconsistent. It's hard to, on a week-to-week basis, say we have this staunch player up front who can really get after it. He's just so inconsistent.
Along those same lines, Danny Shelton, former Washington player, also Xavier Cooper, former Washington State player. A lot of people were excited to see those guys go the same place. Have they factored in heavily this year?
Cooper has not. It's been a snap count thing, and he's just at the back of the line as far as that goes. But Danny Shelton, he's probably not been playing as well as people think he should be. He's playing a difficult position for a rookie, I think, just playing straight over the nose every single time he's on the field, and really trying to occupy space while being disruptive up front. I think that's difficult for a rookie to do. So he's had some technique problems, which have been a snafu for him this year, and he's aware of it. The power thing isn't really an issue, obviously, with him. So he's a guy who you just kind of take your lumps with this year and hope he looks better next year, basically. And I also wonder if nose tackle is his best position. I think you look at a guy like that in his size and his build, and you say, okay, he's a nose tackle. But you would say the same thing about Red Bryant when he was with the Seahawks, for instance. Okay, he's just a nose tackle because he's a mammoth, and that wasn't the case. And I do wonder if the Browns are misusing him a little bit. So that's what I want to see if the Browns do change head coaches. If they go back to a 4-3, someone like Shelton, who's a good athlete for someone that size, utilize that a little more than he's been afforded to this year.
What are the odds, do you think, right now of Joe Thomas and Alex Mack being around, over the next couple of years? Do you have any fears that, at some point Joe Thomas, I don't know exactly, is there a fear of Joe Thomas leaving in a way of just sort of like, hey, I'm never going to win here, or getting fed up or anything like that? And I know Alex Mack also is perhaps entering free agency.
Yeah, Joe Thomas, he was, there was a lot of smoke around the trade deadline with Joe Thomas this year, and I think that was more the Browns causing it than Joe Thomas seeking it out. I think Joe Thomas is a loyal guy. He's the best player the Browns have had since they came back in 1999, which does not say a lot, mind you, but it's a thing. And I think he's a lifer as long as the Browns want him here. His play's been a little bit down, but he's still a very good player. So I think he'll be here as long as the Browns want him here. I think he has 3 more years on his contract. So it's a pretty favorable contract as far as the NFL goes today. So that's, as a fan, I hope he's here the whole time. And, he gives you someone to at least latch on to who's a good player for you. But Alex Mack can opt out of his contract after this year. He was signed to a really bizarre deal because the Jaguars gave him a ton of money and the Browns had to match it last offseason, and he has the potential to opt out. And I think the Browns expect that to happen, and that's why they picked Cameron Irving with the first round 19th overall pick this year. So I think Alex Mack might be gone. He's a really good player. So an excellent all-around player. I mean, you think about a guy who could jump into Seattle's starting lineup right now, and Alex Mack would probably be the first guy that comes to mind.
I'm going to get a lot of fans excited about that prospect. Back to the defensive side of the ball, Joe Hayden went on the IR, I think either today or yesterday.
Yeah.
He has been quiet this year, I think. We haven't heard a lot about him. I'd heard some stuff saying that he wasn't having as strong of a year as we probably are used to. Is that true, number one? And number two, who's replacing him?
That is true. There's been some weird stuff with Joe Hayden this year. There was a game against San Diego earlier in the season where, he practiced all week, and then he pulled himself out of the game like an hour before kickoff. And that, the aura of Cleveland and the area around here is that you bust your butt and you go out there even when you're not at your best or you're hurt. And that turned a lot of people off on Joe Hayden, I think. And he was not having a good year besides that, and now he's had a concussion that's kind of knocked him out for, I want to say it'll be a 5-game thing that's really hurt him. So I think there's that guise of he has a concussion, that's a 1-week injury, get back out there. And I think there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about the severity of a concussion and how much and how long it can affect a player. But that's what's happened with Joe Hayden this year. So bad play and injuries, and his matting rating will be worse next year. We'll just say that.
If you could, so assuming that the Browns are, it's a really tough schedule. There's no doubt about it. At Seattle, at Kansas City, Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, most people are going to say 3-13 is coming up. Mm-hmm. Assuming. If you're sitting there now with the Browns, people can follow you on Twitter at Mocking the Draft, mock drafts. You go to the SB Nation, you do the drafts, all that kind of stuff. So that's your thing. So now you're in an opportunity, perhaps, for the Browns to get the first overall pick for the first time since 2000. They went Tim Couch and then they went Courtney Brown. Once again, maybe a number 1 pick. Who is your pick if you're picking number 1 that you think is going to give Cleveland the best chance? And let's say that you don't pick number 1 and you think that, say, Joey Bosa is for sure going to go number 1. Who's your number 2?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have to make assumptions both ways. If you assume that Johnny Manziel doesn't play well enough to convince the Cleveland Browns that he's the future starting quarterback, you go with Jared Goff or Paxton Lynch. Right now I'm leaning Jared Goff probably just because he's a little more, I think, ready-made for the NFL. And, if you're at 1 and Mike Pettin is gone, which he very well could be, you think about, do you switch to a 4-3 and do you take Joey Bosa with the first overall pick? And if you don't, you probably just take a quarterback. So it's hard to see the Browns taking an offensive tackle, which would be the other choice that high in the draft. Laramie Tunsil of Ole Miss is going to be up there. Ronnie Stanley from Notre Dame is going to be up there. So, you probably wouldn't pick them to play right tackle because Mitchell Schwartz, by the way, is probably going to be gone. He's a free agent. So you probably don't take them. I don't think someone like Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss, the wide receiver, is worth a top 5 pick. He just doesn't profile to be like that Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, A.J. Green type of superstar wide receiver. So it's really Bosa or a quarterback at this point, it looks like, at least.
The Seahawks have had some issues with pass protection, to say the least, but it's been cleaned up a little bit over the last couple of weeks. What are the main pass rushing threats the Browns are going to bring?
I would watch for Armonte Bryant. He's a little undersized to play with his hand down in an odd front, but he's really gotten home the last couple weeks and really affected the quarterback. So he's one to watch for sure. Um, I would love to tell you Barkevius Mingo has made strides this season, but that's just not true. My friends and I have jokingly started referring to him as elite coverage linebacker Barkevius Mingo, which is not ideal. Paul Kruger's still out there. He's been a little miscast this season, and he really hasn't been as effective, but he could still be a little bit of a factor. Christian Kirksey, who is more of a traditional weak side linebacker, is actually pretty okay sometimes at generating a blitz.
Hmm.
So I think he's worth watching for. The Browns strangely don't seem to use their safeties on blitzes, hardly ever, I don't think. So that's not really a worry. And then Desmond Bryant, like we were talking about earlier, he can get home sometimes too. So that's what I would watch out for.
The Seahawks have a strong affinity or familiarity, I should say, with Dante Whitner. He was kind of a hated guy here for a long time because of the 49ers rivalry and everything, and the whole Dante Hittner era. How has he been for the Browns? Is he expected to? Is he still the starter for the Browns, and is he a big factor?
He's a starter. He's had a couple injury things this year. He is who he is. I mean, he's a thumper who's going to come down in the run game. And he can do a little bit in coverage, but not a ton. Obviously, he's a little slower because he's getting up there. But he's a hardworking guy. He's the starter still. Tayshaun Gibson's back there next to him, who can be a playmaker, but he hasn't been as much of one this season. But Whitner is a guy who probably isn't going to get you in any trouble on the field, but it seems like his days of being a big impactful player are a little behind him.
I want to use your draft knowledge against you now and sort of talk about the Seahawks and how good they are. But, not only, it was only, 8-9 months ago that you were spending a lot of time with this rookie draft class. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of curious, I know that we've seen over the last few weeks Tyler Lockett turn into a very good wide receiver in addition to his abilities on special teams. What was your pre-draft grade type scouting report on Tyler Lockett, and are you surprised at all by his play so far?
As I recall, my opinion of Tyler Lockett was I was very intrigued by the potential he brought based on his speed and his maneuverability on the field. I think the size was a concern, and I think it always kind of will be. Because he's never going to be a bulky kind of player, so you always kind of wonder when he gets popped on special teams, is this the one where he gets hurt? Mm-hmm. And I think all of that's still true. And Tyler Lockett, my opinion always is when you take a player, cater your team to what that player can do if they're really that important to you. I think the perfect example of that is John Brown with the Cardinals, and I guess he's kind of similar to Lockett in some ways. Get him in a position that takes the best advantage of his skill set, and I think Seattle has done that fairly well with Lockett, like you said, particularly recently. So he's a good player. I don't think he'll ever project out to be a star number one wide receiver, but I think there's more than enough you can do with him to get a lot of production out of him.
Oh, don't say that in Seattle right now. People are
sure
100% certain that the next Antonio Brown has been born. But yeah, I mean that's interesting though that as well that you reminded me with your comments of the comments that Mike Pettin made today in regards to Russell Wilson, and I'm kind of curious what you think about that.
What an idiot! Why? I mean, even if that's something you believe, that Russell Wilson is not a top tier quarterback, you get 0 out of saying it. First of all. Even if you don't believe it, you can't deny it over the last, 3 or 4 weeks that he's been in that tier of player with Tom Brady and Breeze and whoever else, Aaron Rodgers. He's probably played better than all of them recently, and that's all that matters to the Cleveland Browns. Not what Russell Wilson might do in the playoffs, not what Russell Wilson did in Week 4. He's an elite player at this very particular moment. So it was really a dumb comment, especially when you're 3-10. Um, you
Yeah,
know, yeah, it was stupid.
it's
Frankly.
oddly an insult. He oddly doesn't realize what I think he's saying about himself, because he's saying that Russell Wilson is talented, but in large part a product of coaching. So
Right.
why isn't Johnny Manziel doing that? He's basically saying that, hey, you can coach a player up like that. I can't, but Pete Carroll can.
Yeah, that has been one of the overwhelming negatives about Mike Pettin is that he's rare to take the blame, and he'll always say things like, we had the right game plan, it just wasn't executed, or something along those lines.
Ugh, that's
Which
kind
just,
of where
that just smacks of a guy who is in his first gig as a head coach. And that, if Mike Pettin, if or when he gets fired, I think that's going to be one of the reasons why. Just not being culpable for your own actions, and you know, to say Russell Wilson is a product of the system is, I think that's a dumb mentality. I think, if you wanted to say that about Russell Wilson in his rookie season, I think it's a little bit more understandable when they really lean on Marshawn Lynch more. But in 2015, I think the opposite is true.
my final question for you is just kind of a bit like a general overview one. Like, I think everyone kind of thought the Browns might struggle a little bit on offense this season, but last year they were obviously really good. They were in the hunt late in the season, during the AFC
Mm-hmm.
when the AFC North everyone was above 500 really pretty late in the season. What has happened with the defense this year? Because I thought the defense was supposed to be really like their strong point. They're ranked 29th for DVOA right now. It's been surprising to me.
Well, it's just a thing where, you asked me about who is rushing the passer for the Browns, and
Yeah, yeah.
Armani Bryant came to mind early because he's been doing it recently, but they just don't have a lot of playmakers. And like we talked about, Joe Hayden kind of regressed a little bit this year. Tayshaun Gibson hasn't been making as many plays. They signed Tremont Williams, who's now basically the number one corner. I think he's 32 or 33 and a little slower. I mean, he got torched last week or 2 weeks ago. It's really just a lack of playmakers. Mingo, like we talked about, has been nothing for them. He barely gets on the field. When he does, he's an elite coverage linebacker. Their middle linebackers are, they're not making a lot of plays. So it's just a team that lacks playmaking. I think it lacks a little bit on the creativity on defense. It's the Browns this year came into the year priding themselves on being a great run-stopping defense and running the ball on offense. Until last week, they did neither for 12 weeks. So that's the 2015 Browns in a nutshell.
I guess one more question, and then we'll let you drop out here. But I guess, obviously it's going to be a tough game for Cleveland. For the Seahawks are, heavy favorites. I'm just kind of curious, win or lose. I know that, well, it is kind of curious because even if Johnny Manziel, there's this whole thing, but win or lose, what do you hope at least do you get to see out of the Browns this week?
That Joe Thomas doesn't suffer a compound fracture, I guess. It's the Manziel stuff all the way. Is he legit? He's looked good a couple times this year. He's had some bad moments, sure. I think the good outweighs the bad so far this year. What happens if he does it and looks good against the Seattle Seahawks? And then you move on to the Chiefs and their pass rushers and the hated Steelers to close the year. So it is Manziel and what happens there, and a little sliver of me is very intrigued by Terrell Pryor. at wide receiver. He's a 6'5" super athlete who you have no idea what he can do at the position. So when you go down the list of things worth watching with the Browns, those two for me at least are at the top.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in Seattle had those same curiosities about Terrell Pryor last year or whenever it was. But yeah, that he could do that. But the interesting thing, like you say, with Manziel, it's this odd catch-22 where wins could mean that you're keeping the team together, and at the same time, do you want to keep the team together because they haven't been that successful? It's almost like the Browns are Hell's 49ers, and there's everything, because it seems like the GM is getting all these guys that the coach doesn't want. All of the guys that you take in the first round and the second round, and you were almost on the precipice of getting rid of another first round pick just 2 years later. I mean, do you want the team to stay together? Do you want Ray Farmer and Mike Pettin to come back next year?
Well, it's truly a wonderful thing, and why the Browns are now a verb. Ray Farmer has to go. I think you can't whiff on so many first-round picks and not pay the consequences for it. So, like I mentioned about Mike Pettin, I think there's some positives there, but you have to be a little more mature as a head coach, and you have to be a little more willing to change your ways, particularly when you're a defensive coach and your defense stinks. And the Manziel stuff, I think it's going to play itself out. If he plays well, maybe they think he's the quarterback of the future. If he plays well enough, maybe they can get a third-round pick from the St. Louis Rams. Who knows?
Yeah.
God.
Well, thank you, Dan, for coming on the Real in the Field Goals podcast to help us preview the Browns and talk through the pain and everything like that so that you can move forward. And I mean, I think I speak for Danny I think that the Cleveland Browns have so many interesting players, so many guys that I think are good. And at the same time, if they could just come together, I think we came into this season wondering how good the Browns could be. Yeah. And here we are, obviously at the end of the same sad yellow brick road, it seems.
Yeah, well, thanks for the therapy session. I appreciate it. Have me anytime.
Well, all the best to Joe Thomas. All the best to Josh Gordon returning next year and not pulling a Justin Blackman.
Ugh, that's true. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dan. All right, that's Dan Kadar from Mocking the Draft. Follow him on Twitter, Mocking the Draft. Dan Nee, any thoughts there on what you heard that maybe you didn't expect before the conversation?
No, I think it was interesting hearing him talk about the lack of a pass rush. Hadn't really, thought about that a whole lot in the run up to this game, and that's good. I think because especially considering sort of what Mike Pettin, what Mike Pettin has said about Russell Wilson. If he has a pretty clean pocket back there, I think Wilson has a chance to have a really big game this week. So that's going to be a big deal. He was talking about some of the free agents they picked up. They haven't been especially outstanding. I think, the Seahawks are, even though we're going into the game with a big question mark at the running back position, I think the Seahawks could run all over the Browns this week, and that'd be interesting to see, especially if they get a lead and they start just kind of running it. So
yeah, I mean, one surprise was Paul Kruger, because I feel like when the 2012 Ravens broke up basically and they started parsing off all the guys they couldn't afford, and these guys started getting all these big Super Bowl contracts, Kruger was one of these guys who I didn't necessarily expect to be as successful somewhere else as he was with Baltimore, but I remember, last year he had 11 sacks. He had 4 forced fumbles. I think, his ratings were right up there if you go to the advanced stats and stuff like that. But this year he's done almost nothing. 2.5 sacks, no forced fumbles, no pass defenses, just a few, 12 tackles. And he's played every game.
Weird.
But so I don't know he's only 29 years old. If the Cleveland Browns, I don't know what his contract situation is, but I would assume that after 3 years, he's probably in that situation where maybe he's coming out. I would be interested to see, where the market's going to be if the Seahawks aren't able to retain Bruce Irvin. There's similar, perhaps, roles there.
He could be a fallback type option, yeah.
I don't want to. Again, I feel like I'm the overly confident guy every week. Perhaps I did predict 42-0, and the Cleveland Browns. There's no way that this should be a competition, right?
I mean, no, I don't think so. I think that the Browns are not a good team, and the Seahawks are playing some of the best ball they've played over the last couple of years. So, to me, there's no reason to think that the Seahawks will lose this game. I mean, you have to always use the caveats, I feel like, or else it just feels like you're jinxing them. But I don't believe in superstition, so the Seahawks should win this game.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that if I have the power to affect the outcome of a game because of my confidence, I have way too much power. And here we are, though.
Power.
My biggest fear is, I mean, other than it would be the Thomas Rawls injury still hurts a lot. It hurts me more than it hurts him, and I do want to. One of my other fears is we've got now Russell Wilson on this streak, 16 touchdowns, no interceptions. He can go. He can take it further than anyone's ever taken a streak like this before in NFL history. You look at the Cleveland Browns; they're 31st in net yards per pass attempt allowed, 30th in points allowed. One of the worst defenses, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions on their defense, allowing a passer rating of 100.3. Really want Russell Wilson to come out of this game strong. And right now, the Browns secondary is hurt with Joe Hayden going out. No matter whether or not Joe Hayden was having a good season or a bad season, he's still Joe Hayden. And whoever his backup is probably not Joe Hayden. I know Justin Gilbert has not played a lot. And it was not really, he's already seeming in that bust type range for a guy that was picked, I think, 9th overall, but he's been missed the last 3 games. I wouldn't see them rushing him back. And it really seems like their corner and their secondary is going to be dinged up even more than possible, which just makes me fear that, Russell Wilson's going to have like 1 or 2 mistakes just because everything seems set up so perfectly.
Right. Well, you can't think like that, Kenny.
I don't know.
If you have the power, just think positive.
Well, the power of positive thinking compels me to speak briefly on Real in the Film Gulls. This is the week. This is Star Wars week.
Yeah.
We mentioned it briefly on the Instant Reaction podcast. We weren't sure when. I don't know. You weren't sure when you were going to see it, though. You are a Star Wars nerd in a sense. And I was sitting here, and I'm sitting here basically next to a movie theater. I checked the times, and the 1:30 a.m. showing on Thursday night is very. It wasn't that packed thus far, so I was able to get a decent seat. So I will come prepared. I will know what's going on in Star Wars by Friday, and I'm glad for that.
You're going to a 1:30 a.m. show?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm not bothered recently by living the night life.
Yeah, you're a night owl?
I'm a night owl and an early bird. So what's the one for morning bird? Yeah.
Early bird gets the worm? I don't know.
Well, it's a night owl or a morning something?
Morning person? That's the only one I've heard. I'm sure there's a very clever...
Yeah, I usually am the guy. I've always been the guy that gets up like at 6, 7 a.m. But lately, I'm the guy that goes to bed at 6, 7 a.m. So
yeah,
I'm perfectly content with seeing Star Wars at 1:30 in the morning. And just because I feel like tiny little facts about the movie are already coming out. It's already got a Rotten Tomatoes score. All these little things that I just don't want to know. And if you wait till Saturday, might as well just have the whole plot laid out for you right now.
I'm not one of those people that cares about spoilers. I legitimately don't care. I like going to movies where I've read the book beforehand. I will look up spoilers on the internet rather than watch a show because I don't like suspense.
What?
I don't know
you
why.
Want to be
I don't know why I like NFL because it's all about just sickening suspense. but maybe that's why I don't like it in my movies. It's like escapism. It's like I want to know what happens. I don't give a shit.
So someone's like, "Oh yeah, you should see The Sixth Sense. It's got this great twist ending," and you're like, "Well, what is the twist ending?" And then I'll decide if I want to see it.
Yeah, I don't care.
That's a unique thing that we finally have now gotten out of you on Real in the Film Goals that we had not. And we can talk about that. I'm going to find out what movies you haven't seen, and I'm going to start spoiling them for you.
Go ahead, man. I look up all the. I literally will read about what a show, like how it ends before it ends, because I get sick of waiting for it to end.
That's interesting. That's a quality I've not met in a person.
I'll continue to watch it and like enjoy it. I just the whole spoiler suspense thing doesn't bother me.
I mean, to be fair, a good movie should hold up without the spoiler. And
Right.
There's movies. I know how the end of the Usual Suspect goes. I've still seen that movie 20 times.
Yeah.
You know, good stuff is good stuff, though.
There's a few movies in there. I will say with a caveat. There's a few movies where I'd say obviously it's probably better not to have a spoiler. Like if you're going to watch, say, The Village, or if you're going to watch The Sixth Sense, it's probably another good example.
Yeah.
Or The Usual Suspects, your mind's probably going to be a little more blown if you don't know what happens at the end. But
to me, movies like that, it's all about the experience. It's about going in and having that experience where your heart and your mind are, shocked, and you can sort of, it's like, it's an adrenaline rush, and in a smaller sense maybe than a roller coaster, but it's a whole experience. Like, speaking of M. Night Shyamalan, he had a movie come out this year called The Visit. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't watch a trailer. I just wanted to go see it. I didn't want to know anything about it. And I do that more and more as I possibly can. And I'm watching it and I'm trying to figure out what the twist is, because I know it's coming, and I couldn't figure it out. And then when it came, I was like, I got chills, and I was like, so I definitely, and maybe that's what also you like about sports, is that, there is no spoilers involved. You're watching it as it happens. So you don't know if there's something good or bad happening. It's all happening right in front of you live. And that's something, to hold in its own respect. So,
I mean, I think people who like to go to like thriller movies or horror movies are masochists. Like, why do you want to be stressed out? Like, isn't there enough stress in your life already?
I mean, there's masochism to being a Seahawks fan or a Mariners fan.
Maybe more accurately, a Browns fan. But yeah.
But yeah, and the other Real in the Film Goals update, I want to give out a shout out to a movie that I hadn't heard of. That there's all these other movies that people talk about, and I hadn't heard of this one. It's called The Lobster, and
sounds familiar.
It's like, it's a foreign film, in the sense that it's filmed in Ireland. I think the director is from Sweden or something, and it's got a bunch of big names in it. It's got Colin Farrell, John C. Reilly, Rachel Weisz, some other people that you would recognize, and it's just so weird. It reminds me a little bit of Stanley Kubrick. It reminds me a little bit of Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman.
What's the basic premise? The
basic premise is that in the near future, in some other sort of, I won't even say it's like an alternate dimension, if it's science fiction-y, but basically
some alternate reality.
Yeah. So basically, if you're single, you get arrested and taken to a hotel where you have 45 days to find a mate. And if you don't find a mate, you get turned into an animal.
I heard about this. Yeah. I actually watched the trailer.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about it. I just went into it and I was like, wow, I was blown away.
Yeah, and Colin Farrell's like, I decided to become a lobster.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
So the premise is so odd, but at the same time, all of the actors play it so straight that you don't think of it as odd. You just go with it. And Colin Farrell does really good. John C. Reilly does really good.
Wait, did you see the movie?
Yeah.
Oh, and you liked it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I loved it. Spoiler alert, it's going to go somewhere in that top 10, I think.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But there's so much more to see. These Critics' Choice Award lists are coming out, and you don't know what to expect maybe from preseason expectations, Mad Max is getting a lot of love right now, and I like that. I think I'm seeing a lot of The Revenant. And then other movies like Brooklyn, and some other stuff that I might have to force myself to watch a little bit. But not so much Hateful Eight. I haven't seen a lot of Hateful Eight love. That's the one that I'm most looking forward to. Are you a Quentin Tarantino guy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to not be, but he's definitely won me over.
Yeah. I'm that's the one where I think Star Wars is in a movie theater experience, and then also the Hateful Eight, I guess if you can go to one of these Roadhouse shows where they're doing it in 70 millimeter and there's like an intermission, like they do this whole experience. I'm going to be in New Orleans for Christmas when it's released, and I'm still deciding if I want to spend part of one of my days on vacation at a movie, but it is Quentin Tarantino, so
yeah,
I think it's going to be pretty good. Yeah.
As well.
I want to see The Revenant too. There's a lot of stuff coming out in these next couple weeks, but we'll have some Force Awakening. I won't do any spoilers unless it's to Danny off air, so no worries there.
People will be furious if you do.
Oh, for sure, and I wouldn't blame them. But too freaking bad. You listened. It's your problem. And speaking of which, have another problem this Sunday after the game and listen again to Real in the Field Goals instant reaction show following the Cleveland Browns game. I believe, is this another 1 o'clock show or 1 o'clock game, Danny?
Yeah, 1 or 1:25. I can't remember.
So afternoon, that means we'll be back in the evening talking about the Seahawks and the Browns, updating the playoff picture, seeing how the running backs did. Lots of interesting stuff to see this week against the Cleveland Browns, believe it or not. And then following that, St. Louis Rams. And that is this week's episode. So go to fieldgoals.com. Subscribe on iTunes to Reel in the Field Goals. Tell friends. And, make sure you get that subscription. Go on Twitter. You can go to Field Goals or Kenneth Arthur S. And anything else to plug, Danny?
Nope, that's it.
Oh, Deep Balls is the Pick'em podcast. There's only a couple more weeks that you have to do that.
Yeah, we are going to be recording here in a little while, actually.
Do you think that you'll do playoff picks? Is that a thing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, I'll ask Jackson if he wants to, but I don't know. I don't think that's really a thing.
Yeah, maybe it's just a thing that people might want to know if they're betting on in Vegas or something.
Yeah.
But probably not for office pools, though maybe. I mean, there
might be some sort of Survivor or something or other.
Why wouldn't you want to put on, why wouldn't people, if you're going to do an office pool for a whole season, I feel like it'd be really interesting to do like a March Madness type thing with the playoffs. You got a bracket and whatnot. I guess then you don't really know who they're going to play in the second round. So that's a problem.
Yeah. I don't know how it works because I haven't been in an office forever. So
yeah, me neither. 3,000 NFL mock draft next Monday. We'll have Dan Hatman from the Scouting Academy on.
Ooh, cool.
Dan was obviously a guest here on Real in the Field Goals, and I think recently made some comments on Twitter about Heisman winner Derrick Henry possibly being a 4th round pick. So we'll get into that and more next Monday on 3,000 NFL mock draft. Myself and Rob Staten. And, you can also find my work on Rolling Stone, Sports on Earth, Danny over at SB Nation. And that's it. So, Real in the Field Goals is out.